Well, would you like to ask any questions? Oops. Or perhaps I should do it the way they do it in the movies. Any questions? Yes. You in front? Yes, you.
I think that all of us have been fascinated by your Ananda community. We've had a lot of your people there come here and back and forth. We've had over the years of relationship with it, and I'd be interested in hearing more of the sorts of things that Master would speak with you about related to the community, or specifically what
I got whatever information I could from Master on how he wanted communities to go. There was even a long proposal that he wrote to Henry Ford, hoping Henry Ford would back such a thing, and I read that and so on. But basically, what the disciples have to do is take whatever little hints he gave and then take it into meditation and let him tell us in meditation how to make it work. When he put me in charge of the monks, for example, he didn't set me down and say, now Walter, this is what you should do and this is what you shouldn't do and so on. He'd throw out a few hints every now and then. He'd correct me if I did something wrong. But he wanted me to use my intuition, attuned to his will, to accomplish that. And that's basically, as he said, Lahiri Mahashaya wrote his books through disciples. He told them to just tune in, and many of his books were written by disciples who just tuned into his consciousness and allowed the Master to write through him. In fact, I wrote a book called Cities of Light about Ananda. And I had a seclusion of a month, and in that seclusion I wrote, I think, 7 or 8 books. It was a very productive period for me. But at the end, I just had a week to go. And the head of our publications said it would be so wonderful if you could write a book about communities. I said, I know it would, but I can't. I mean, I'm at the end of this seclusion. That's too big a book to attack. And yet, I too was thinking, gee, that would be it was timely. We were coming up to our 20th anniversary, and it was a timely book to write. And I thought, what a pity I can't. And suddenly I thought, well, I can't, but Master can. And so I put aside all the thought, I can't, and just said, all right, you write this thing through me. And it was like a flood coming through my brain, and I just couldn't keep up with it. As the ideas came out, and the whole book, I wrote it in 5 days. But it just flowed out, and I felt so full of joy afterwards, because I thought, now I can talk about this ideal. I've got a book to back it up with that says what we've done. So Ananda grew out of his intense desire that such communities start, out of the attunement of myself in this case to his will, out of recognition that he was very practical. He was not a dreamer. I used to be a dreamer, but he made me a practical man. It was born also out of, he used to say to me many times, he said, you have a great work to do. And I remember one time the monks were meditating with Rajarshi. And when I came up to Rajarshi, he said, Master has a great work to do through you, Walter, and he will give you the strength to do it. And I always remembered those words, he will give you the strength to do it. Because that's what it turned out, that every time any problem came up, I found that strength inside to meet it, to overcome it. Every time a question came up and I didn't know what to do, I'd ask him and he gave me the answer. I just knew what to do. And that's also a part of the strength to do it, having the intuition and the guidance. So, in a way you'd have to say that he did it through me. I don't think I could have done anything like it on my own. There were too many miracles necessary to make it happen. Too much strength to put out to make it even possible. But through that attunement, and that's what you'll find here too, have found, that the more you just choose to be willing instruments for that divine will, knowing that the divine wants this kind of thing, don't think about what's going to happen 20 years from now. Don't think about, I've never worried about what's going to happen in the future. Today, what you've got to face today, how to handle it, keeping a little thought for the future so you don't go in a direction that later on will mushroom into something undesirable. But the sufficient, as Jesus said, sufficient unto the day the evil thereof. Work with what's here. One of the things, and I think this is why he put me in charge of the monks too, one of the things that's most important, and most people who start communities don't understand this. They don't realize that a community is not solar power. A community is not a special kind of architecture. A community is not all the different gimmicks or skills, scientific or otherwise, you use to grow better crops. A community is quite simply people. And to learn to work with people, that's the major thing. To learn to work with people, not over them. It's easy to drive people, it's difficult to lead them. What you have to do is work with people in such a way that you draw them out as leaders. You have to, even I've found many times if I've had an idea that I was wanting someone to do and he had a different idea that I didn't think was as good, I'd go along with that because it's something he felt in tune with, and in developing that, even if it was a mistake, he'd learn. Whereas if I protected him from his mistakes, he'd never learn. And sometimes I'd learn, sometimes his idea was better than mine. But in that way, a community cannot be run on likes and dislikes. It cannot be run on opinion. It cannot be run on emotion. My opinion in things doesn't matter for anything. The only thing that matters is the truth. And if I have an idea and other people have another idea and it seems better than mine, I have no face to save. I'm only trying to get the truth. I'm only trying to do what's right. And so if I recognize what's right, I can make a 180-degree turn right away and go in a new direction, because who it is doesn't matter. A leader can't afford to exist. He just has to be an instrument. He just has to be somebody who's there to do the best thing possible with everyone else. But these are all things Master taught by his example. And so, how did he start Ananda, rather than how did I start it? How did it come to be? I don't really know. There are a lot of specifics that happen, for sure. I don't know that it's worth telling all that part of the story, because it's not the reality anyway. It would have happened anyway, if the attitude was right. My desire was always to sort of get other people to do it, and I'd sit in the background. But I've had to sort of work with them to get it going. We've grown to the point now where I'd say, well, we have about 350 people living at Ananda Village, but we also have centers, residential communities in Sacramento, Palo Alto, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, Assisi, Italy. Probably our members, resident members, come to around 600, 700, 800 people. It's hard to know exactly, but around there. And the success of the community has been phenomenal. Out of many groups that were started, I think we're probably the only ones who have hung in there that were started back in the 60s. But it was all the divine plan. I think that now has come the time where we don't talk about Ananda. I think what we have to talk is about the idea. I think we have to talk about places like this, about all the different places that can bring that idea. I've been sort of a pioneer who has slashed the undergrowth and cleared it so you can plant a farm. But now's the time where certain things, you know, in the beginning it's so much harder because you have an idea, but everybody else has his own ideas. And you can't say this is the way we do things. That's the easiest way to answer it. Now we can say that. We can say, well, you can do that somewhere else, but this is the way we do things. Well, the more we can have a precedent established, the more we can have traditions, the more we can show that Master's communities are such and such, the more it's possible for people to come into something, and it's already there in the beginning. You need people to make a thing work, but to draw people, you've got to have something that works. So how do you settle that dilemma? People don't want to sail their money on the east wind. They want to get back a winner. How do you show a winner when you haven't won? You haven't even started racing. But bit by bit, as this thing has grown, people look at it now and they say, well, gee, it does work. And I look at this community ideal. I'm not talking of Ananda as a place. I'm talking of the ideal of which you two are a representative. I consider it the most important thing going on in the world today. I don't think peace is going to come by governments getting together and talking about peace and living something else. I don't think solutions of any kind are going to come from governments. All they do is tax you more. And then it goes in here and everywhere else but in where it needs to go. It's got to come from people. There's another thing about it. You look at America and you see two things. One is the hard driving of materialistic, atheistic, somebody not interested in spiritual values. Isn't that the common image of the American? It isn't a true image at all. There's another image that you all represent, and it's much truer. I remember I was in India years ago, and after being in India for quite some time and having to go back to America, I just felt this pain that I don't want to have to go back to that materialistic culture. And then I met somebody from this country who was a devotee, and she was so sweet and so full of devotion. And I thought, well, that's America. That's the America I love. And that gets buried because the people who speak for America are the intellectuals. The other people don't speak very much, they just act. But they used to say that the best way to beat the Russians in the race to the moon is to get enough energy up to send a dog to the moon. The Americans would feel so badly for that dog that they'd put all their energy into getting him back. And this is the other side of America. What country in history has been attacked by another nation, won the war, and then helped that nation to come back? We put ourselves down in this country, and I think it's a pity. I was born in Romania. I was born an American because my parents were American, but I've lived all over the world. I speak 9 languages. I know other countries in a way much better than this country. In many ways, I had to work hard to adapt myself mentally to the consciousness of this country because I was not naturally an American. I didn't see or think the way Americans do. But I've come to appreciate it all the more because of that. And I see that this is a really marvelous country. Only in this country could this ideal have really taken root. It wouldn't happen anywhere else. I remember in Rome there was a porter's strike, and everybody had to take his own bag off the airplane. There were young girls pulling huge suitcases on their raincoats, old men and women staggering with their bags, young men with a briefcase or a little portfolio striding down the corridor there, not offering to help anybody. I saw one old man, probably about 85 years old. He was carrying these 2 big suitcases, and suddenly he said, "Oh," and he fell over and died of a heart attack, right there in front of my eyes. It took 20 minutes for the airport to find somebody who would come around and draw a sheet over his head. And nobody was helping anybody. And I thought, in America, everybody would be helping. This country was built on cooperative effort. This country was built on spiritual ideals. People came here because they wanted to find spiritual freedom. There's greatness here. And we represent that side of it because we love God, because we love truth, because we love non-materialistic values. That other side is what we have to bring out. And I think that there are saints everywhere in this country just waiting to be awakened. And that's our job. What we are doing right now is, I think, the most important thing, because for devotees to seek God on their own, each one just living alone, you begin to think you're doing a good thing if you help a little old lady across the street. When you live with other devotees, mix with other devotees, go to satsangs where other devotees come, you begin to realize that that's hardly the beginning. That to live a good life means to be a hero, means to really give yourself to this ideal. But we, with this, I think, can change the face of the world. Master said, you can't get rid of darkness by beating at it with a stick, bring in the light. Well, this is the light. We're not going to settle the problems of the world by just talking of the problems of the world. We're going to settle it by being a silent influence. Just a little bit of... The TM people did a very interesting experiment. They said that if enough people meditate in a certain area, it'll change everything. So they went to Rhode Island as the smallest state, and they had a lot of them moved in there, and they were teaching classes in meditation and practicing meditation and so on. After a year, an impartial magazine reported the statistics that the suicide level had gone down. I think it was 53%. Murders were something like 40% less. All sorts of statistics. Accidents in cars were far, far less. Even the weather had improved. The more we live in the thought of God, the more good we're doing for everybody. People say, well, I mean, what are you doing for other people? Somebody was trying in Assisi, trying to get us to get more involved in ecology and so on. I said, listen, if everybody lived the way we do, we wouldn't have a problem with ecology. When you live at harmony inside, harmony spreads outward. Everything you do becomes harmonious. It's human disharmony that creates that, and you think you're doing a big thing by recycling. Well, it's a good thing to do, no doubt, but that's not going to solve anything. Whereas it will solve a great deal if you become harmonious in yourself. The whole world will become harmonious. Start at the center. Don't be like most people in this world whose vision is circumference everywhere, center nowhere. Live at your center and relate to other people at their center. That's what Master was doing. He related to them in their spine. You'll find that you can touch people's lives. You find that you can change the course of events the more you live from that center where God dwells. So communities, we're just at the beginning. We've been there, well, next year will be our 25th anniversary. If you discount the first year, which was, I bought the first land and tried 3 times to build a geodesic dome, and each time it collapsed. And finally I ran out of money and had to go out and start earning more before we could start building again the next year. And Jyotish was with me in those days too. It was a big struggle. But 25 years we've been going now, formally, and 25 years are just nothing. I think you're going to see a century from now, looking back, people are going to recognize what an important thing this was. When devotees could live together, when they could work together, when they could share their ideals, when they could become a power. You take, say, 350 people at Ananda, well, 100 of them are children, so 250 people. Each one in a different city, each one working in a job, each one exerting his own little influence, so that people like him because he's peaceful. How can you not be peaceful if you're meditating? They like being around him. They say, well, Joe, what do you do that makes you so peaceful? He sort of doesn't know quite what to say because he doesn't know how much they're ready to hear. But he says, well, I sort of I have a little time for myself where I'm quiet. And if he sees that they're a little more open, he says, well, I meditate every day. They don't listen, most of them. They'll say, oh yeah, I know, it's really because you're a special kind of guy. Or they'll say, well, I think you eat bran for breakfast. Any excuse besides the real work. The influence he's going to have on people will be maybe one person here, and 10 years later somebody over here. It won't be nearly so great. You get all those people together in one place, they generate a magnetic force. And that force radiates outward into the world, so that people are aware of you, or people are aware of Ananda. We get letters from all over the world, because they know that Ananda's there. There's enough energy building up that it makes it a public statement. The place itself has power. This place has power. You meditate in a place and you begin to feel it. And when you come onto those grounds, you begin to feel your consciousness changed. I've seen so many people at Ananda, they come full of care and all the tensions that come from just fighting the dog-eat-dog battle of life. After a week, even a weekend, see the lines beginning to disappear. They look peaceful, they look happy. And behind you, you had a question too.
I do. I'm tempted to...
One of these fell off.
Thank you.
Somehow, connecting with what you just said, I was in New York City at one time staying at the apartment of a friend of mine, and I thought, boy, you know, New York City is a really great place. I really feel comfortable here. I really like it here, and I meditate so well here. And one morning I was sitting there, and I heard Yogananda's voice suddenly go, something like, I am praying, pray with me. And I went, oh my God, you know. I started running around. Turned out that the woman who lived just upstairs was a devotee of another devotee of Yogananda's.
Isn't that marvelous?
Yeah, just, you know, that support.
Fabulous. You know, I have a friend. He's his name is Manfred. He lives near Milan in Italy. He works with electronics. He's sort of a wave of the future. There was this scientist at the time of Fermi and others, you know, who were developing the atom bomb. This one, his name slips my mind right now. But he was in that same group, but he decided to take atomic energy in a direction that would be serviceful rather than destructive. And this man is a disciple of his. And he's done some astonishing things in the way of using electronic waves or atomic waves or whatever he calls them to offset harmful things, because we're surrounded by harmful vibrations in this culture. Just the electricity in the walls is harmful. It emits a kind of magnetism, creates a kind of magnetism that is not compatible with this body. And we're living bombarded by these energies from all sides. Well, he told a friend of ours who lives now at Ananda, Paolo, that his daughter was living, he hadn't been to the house, he lived miles away, but he said, your daughter's bedroom, her bed is right above a television set. And she's getting rays from that television set that are harmful to her. Move the bed and she'll sleep better. How he knew this, I don't know, but he had some method of tuning in on that. And this friend of mine didn't know anything about the apartment downstairs, so he went and visited, and he found, in fact, that television set was right there. Another thing he said is that television is a really harmful vibration, and if you watch it, there are things he makes that help to nullify that. But he said, when you're not watching it, don't just turn it off, unplug it. Because there are very harmful vibrations that are silent, that come into the house all the time when they're plugged in. He had me move my bed half a meter away from the wall, because so as not to be affected by the magnetism of the electric wires, even though the lights are off. So we're living in a time where these influences are there, and your being under that apartment is a very good example of the same thing. That when there is a devotee, that influence will permeate the whole house even. But especially right under there, that was a lovely blessing.
I wonder, the question I had before was, I've been studying Shakespeare, and I have heard that you said that, or that it was in your book, I don't remember it in your book, but somehow I had heard that you had said that there was an association between Yogananda and Shakespeare. And I wondered if that was true, and if so...
I haven't said it.
Oh, okay.
I've questioned sometimes, because I don't think there's this connection, but Dr. Lewis's wife, Mrs. Lewis, Master told her she was Queen Elizabeth. If the disciples were around at that time, which Master didn't, I never even asked Master about my past lives. It just didn't, a lot of people did, but I just thought, well, that's past and it's over with. I've got to worry about where I am now. But he said that I was a political leader and a poet himself, not me. That I was a poet in a past life. And what poet that would be, a Master would be a great poet. So I thought it could be Shakespeare. Some people, I know Ananda said that he was Omar Khayyam, maybe, I don't know. I never heard that. Somebody looking at Master once saw his face transform into the face of Shakespeare. So that raised a question in my mind, but I don't have an answer for it. It's interesting to think about, that's all.
Yeah. Well,
He loved Shakespeare, so do I.
yeah.
And but there's a lot of Shakespeare that I don't think it could be Master, frankly. For one thing, his humor was often not kind. Master was very kind. It would be intrinsic in his nature to be kind. And for that reason alone, even, I would say, the other side of it is that he told us that he was William the Conqueror. That was a shock for me, because in India, I mean in Romania, we studied the Calvert system, which was a system that came from England, and it was the history was based on a book called Our Island Story. And William the Conqueror came off as looking like a villain. And I went to school in England for 2 years, and William the Conqueror seemed like a villain. I mean, this foreigner came in and took our island. That was the sort of feeling. Plus, all the chroniclers of his life were English monks who didn't have all that kindly a feeling toward their conqueror. Then to suddenly find out that this person I'd grown up with thinking of as a villain was my guru was a shocker, to say the least. I learned a lot about William since then, and I found out what a really great man he was. He was he never missed Mass one day in his life. He was very deeply religious. His only close friends were saints. Many things that I learned about him that the chroniclers didn't get right. In fact, one time somebody was reading from a biography of William, a story, and Master said, "What? Read that again." So they read the story again, and he laughed. He said, "Oh, they distort history. It wasn't at all like that." Anyway, I visited Rouen, where his body is, and they have a sculpture of William on the top of the crypt there, and it looks exactly like Master. I was amazed. Same nose, same everything. Shakespeare doesn't look at all like Master. And I would say that too would be an indication. Another interesting thing about it was Master said he was Arjuna, and that both William and Arjuna were said to be the only people alive at their time that could bend the particular bow they had. Funny how little things like that carry through. Yes.
Could you tell us from your experience what part you think Hatha Yoga has played in the spiritual practice?
It's a good thing to practice. It's not a necessary thing to practice. If you have enough time, I'd say it was a very good thing to practice. But it depends on your own inclination. But obviously in asking the question, I must assume you've done it, and you feel good afterwards. You do feel good afterwards. I even wrote a book on the subject, although personally I'm not that drawn to Hatha Yoga. It's just not that much in my temperament. But I felt that these people they've got a wrong handle on it. They're making it a physical thing. But really, Hatha Yoga is based on the third stage of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the eightfold, eight-limbed path. The third stage is asana. And people think that asana means all the yoga asanas, the yoga postures. What Patanjali really meant was to be able to sit still with a straight spine. That's all it amounts to. You can sit in a chair and you're practicing asana if you don't move. But the whole system of Hatha Yoga came from that one thing, asana. And assuming these different poses. Well, people kept talking about these postures as means of flushing out your liver and helping your bowels to move better and pressing on the thyroid. And I thought, wait a minute, this is on the path of Raja Yoga. This is the physical branch of Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga is the meditative science. Obviously, it can't mean that. This can be a spin-off. It can be one result. But its real influence has to be what it does to the mind, to help prepare you for meditation, to help develop attitudes of courage and positive thinking and all those attitudes that help you to develop spiritually. So I wrote in my book, Yoga Postures for Higher Awareness, I wrote this aspect of it, to use the postures to affirm different mental attitudes that will help you spiritually. That way the mind helps the body helps the mind. We are a threefold being, Master said: physical, mental, spiritual. I have a letter that I quoted in the Path where Master wrote to me, keep exercise, body fit for God realization. We have to keep a healthy body. The thing is, don't put all your energy there and not have enough time to meditate. So that's why I say if you have enough time during the day to practice the postures and meditate too, wonderful to do. If you don't do that, at least do the energization. They're great. But I'll tell you something. I consider that, I have to say that to me the energization seem more important, at least in this respect, that they make you aware of yourself as energy, of your body as energy. But one time, Master was talking to a guest about the postures, and he said that older people, of course, it's harder for them to do this, and so they can at least do the energization. And I piped up and I said that they're even better than the yoga postures, and he just looked at me. He didn't say yes, which made me think, wait a minute here. They do something for your energy flow that's very, very good. Master brought, this was his great contribution, the energization exercises, and even with that he was saying don't knock their importance, but to make a big thing of it is not a good thing, because then your mind is on the body. To ignore them is certainly possible. As he says in Autobiography of a Yogi, that somebody bent on God realization doesn't put too much energy in the yoga postures. But to be true to what he said, I'm forced to say that they're a great thing to do, even though I don't do them. And I keep sort of knotting a handkerchief and saying, must get to this. I'll get back to them one of these days. But I hope that answers you. Any other questions? Yes.
Swami Yogananda says that Hatha Yoga is spiritual, and he affirms that over and over again. They're not just physical.
Yes, well that's what I was...
Exercise.
I was saying that. Devananda was very much a Hatha yogi, so he would say it with much more emphasis than I would. But now that doesn't make him wrong. Mind you, we're dealing, Ramakrishna used to say that everybody likes sweetness, but some like it in the form of shandesh, some in the form of chocolate, some in the form of sweet drinks. So we all like different aspects of the path, we all like different paths. And that depends on our nature and what we feel in tune with. And what's right for one person is not necessarily right for others or even for anyone else. And in the same way, the teachings of a guru are general, because there are certain things that are right for everybody to do, but they're also particular. And what he would tell one disciple, he might not tell anyone else. So you remember in the Bible even, where Jesus is saying at the end of his life that to John, the beloved disciple, that he's not to be involved in these things. In other words, he spent his whole life meditating. And Peter was sort of thinking, well, what about me? And Jesus said that if I give this to him, what's that to you? You do what I've given you to do. He'll do what I've given him to do. I'm paraphrasing, but it's at the end of the Gospel of John, so you can look it up. And with Devananda's thing too, that's his thing, and he'd be much more into it than someone else. And that doesn't make him wrong or the other person wrong. They're both right, depending on the particular approach. Yes?
Do you go to see other masters?
I do. I believe in...
Why?
Why? Why not? I know when I used to go to Ananda Mohima. Mind you, I'll explain that a little bit. I don't encourage everybody to go, because I can see that in some people it dilutes their devotion to Master. I don't have to worry about that. He's mine. I couldn't possibly lose my touch with him. And when I went to be with Ananda Mohima, I found that it just reawakened my love for him. And she would say sometimes to me that if you feel what I'm saying is coming from your guru, it will be so. And he would advise me sometimes through her. I went to many saints in India and I found great inspiration, but it helped me in my sadhana and didn't take me away from him. And I don't feel God is everywhere, but God is particularly manifested in saints. If I've got to meet all these people around who are a bunch of bums, Why not at least mix with a few people who aren't?
Yeah, but you only went when you were on your path. You didn't do it once you were established.
Once I was established?
Once you're established did you do it all your life?
No, I never was on the
Do you
path.
go there now? Would you go to see?
Oh, yes.
You still do?
Of course. Why don't you see people who are... Master went to Sri Rama Yogi. He told me I spent 4 days with Sri Rama Yogi. Master said if I had spent another half hour with him, I could never have brought myself to leave India again. He didn't need Sri Rama Yogi. He was always with God. But what a joy it is to meet people who are in tune with the same things you're in tune with. What a joy it was for him. He walked hand in hand with Sri Rama Yogi around the ashram of Ramana Maharshi. Neither of them said a word. There's the most beautiful photograph I've ever seen. It's like a painting. The moment of their first meeting. I just wish I could get that photograph. But Sri Rama Yogi has come out of his little cell and sees Master, and they both recognize the God in one another. And Master's got his hand out like that with this beaming smile. And Sri Rama Yogi's looking. These two great souls recognizing each other. What more normal thing can you imagine than people of like mind wanting to get together? There's no reason. I would say, why not, for God's sake? It's. Do you understand that?
Maybe. I got to think that over.
Yeah? Don't you like being with devotees?
Oh yes, but I believe Yogananda and Mr. Black and Divine and Yogananda and Mr. Black, Bob Raymer are this thing. And
well, this thing, I think, is betraying this thing. I think that what a guru helps us to do is love God everywhere. Not say, there's a story Ramakrishna used to tell about a man who only worshipped Shiva, and he wouldn't worship Vishnu. And he was such a fanatic about it that finally one day Shiva used to appear to him in visions and try to explain that I'm in all, you should love all. No, just you. So finally he materialized himself in half form. Half of his body was Shiva, half was Vishnu. This man was waving incense. He closed the nostril on the Vishnu side. He said, your narrowness is incurable. What we've got to do is see, I feel that being a disciple of Master has taught me to be a disciple of life, not just of that body. To be a disciple of truth, not just his own definitions of truth. To love God in every form, and especially to worship it in saints. To find inspiration wherever I find it. He made me broad-minded, not narrow-minded. And I think that's what we need to be. But on the other hand, if we have to be narrow-minded to hang on, okay, then we have to be narrow-minded. But forgive me, I don't want to scold you. But I do want to say that the more you love Mr. Black and Master and Bob Raymer, the more your love automatically will spill over into an unformed love. Not uninformed, formless. A love that doesn't limit itself and is all the richer for that. I love Master all the more because I love God everywhere, because he taught me to love God, not Master. I remember one time I was with Master, and it was it was one of those very sweet times that you have with the Guru. And I was at a theatrical performance, in fact, and he was laughing so hard, and it was just a sweet moment. And I felt such intense love for him. We went to some woman's house afterwards, and I was just sitting, feeling his vibrations. And someone, in fact, said, as we were leaving, I see you're a great student of yoga, and I said, of Yogananda. That was my mood at that moment. But you know, when we got home, Master, there were several of us with him. He told me to go to my room. He kept the others with him. He wanted me to find him here, not there. And he wanted to find him. He wanted me to find him not only in his form, but everywhere. Whenever he saw somebody getting too attached to him, he'd break that attachment in some way, because he always said, don't look at me. God is in this form. Don't identify God with this little form, because God is too great for that.
Tell me what your answer is to this. Mr. I went to see Hammond Bay, and I had obstacle after obstacle, and I never succeeded. And when I came back, Mr. Black said to me very crossly, he said, once you found your master, you don't have to travel all over the place looking for another. Now, put that in
Well,
there.
I completely agree with that too. First of all, Hamid Bey was not a master.
Well,
Secondly, I'm not going to run all over India looking for masters, but if there's one nearby, I'll go. In other words, it depends on the attitude with which you go. I myself have told people don't go when I see that they're looking for something like this. But when you're here, not there, and you're sharing in that spirit, then I would say that it would be perfectly fine to go to somebody like that. If, on the other hand, you've got Master here right now, why go next door? I wouldn't dream of going next door. But Master isn't here right now. Master's in my heart. And in that consciousness I can go other places. You see, meditate on it. Because yeah. Any other? Yes.
When Master gave you the name Kriyananda...
He didn't give me the name Kriyananda.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought
No.
Did he give you a name then?
He probably by mistake called me Walter. I don't know if it was a mistake or if it had a vibration he liked better than Walter's. I don't know. But the first Sunday the first Sunday he spoke after he accepted me, he said, and Walter came all the way from New York. And I thought, Walter? And I looked around, he wanted me to stand up. Whoever it was to stand up, nobody else was standing, and he seemed to be looking in my general direction, so I stood up, and turned out that's who he meant. But Kriyananda, you know, he didn't give people Indian names. Very few. He gave Kamala her name. He gave Durga Mata her name, Durga. Ananda Mata he called Mataji, but then that was changed because in India Mataji is always refers to the head of the institution. So it became confusing when we called her Mataji, and Dayamata, her sister, was the president. I can't really think of anyone else he gave a name to. He didn't give it to Daya. He didn't give it to,
Not to Rajas?
Yes, he gave it to Rajarshi, that's correct. He gave it to Rajarshi.
Yogamata?
That's true, in the early years he did. I'm talking of the ones I knew.
Yogacharya?
That wasn't a name, that was a title. Yogacharya means teacher of yoga. And he gave it on that occasion to several ministers, including Mr. Cuaron, Mr. Gonzalez Milan from Yucatan, Bernard, Yogacharya Oliver, and maybe 2 or 3 others. I'm not sure now. I don't remember the others. Who? Did he give it to her? Really? I didn't know that. I'd forgotten that. Anyway, he didn't give us those names. I think that he really wanted us to be more Western, because that's the society we live in. But when, after his passing, the nuns decided to take names, Daya's name, you know how she chose her name? She told us at the time, I didn't really care about names, but I thought, well, if I have to have one, I'll choose the simplest. This was before she became president. And so she saw the short name on the list there, Daya, 4 letters, so she chose that. Didn't know what it meant. It doesn't mean mother of compassion, Dayamata. It means mother of kindness. Daya is kindness, and Karuna is compassion. So that's a mistranslation, but kindness. And she is kind. That's her nature. So it was a good choice, a felicitous choice, but not given her by Master. And when I heard that the women were getting names, I thought, well, when I take my vows, what name would I like? And then in meditation, the name Kriyananda came to me. So That was the name I
What
chose.
does it mean? What does it mean?
It means, well, of course, Kriya Yoga is the technique we practice. Ananda means divine joy. So it means divine joy through the practice of Kriya Yoga. But Kriya literally means action. So to most Indians, it would mean joy in action or joy through action, through service, through spiritual activity, like that. Kriya is a word allied to karma. Both come from the Sanskrit word kri. And all of those fit in my case because my life has been one of intense activity. In fact, Master said your life is going to be one of intense activity and meditation. But he put the meditation second, unfortunately. I always wanted to be a hermit. I wasn't allowed to do that. Yes.
In the path, there's so many people that I'd love to know what happened to them.
Yeah.
And I can't think, I probably run into one every month, but off the top of my head, how about Mr. Collar? Was it James Collar?
James Collar. He lived in Phoenix. And he died just a few years ago. But he was always devoted to Master. And Master, this was an interesting case. I don't know how many of you have read The Path, but James was sort of well, Master described him as having commotion karma. Everything he did seemed to somehow attract disaster. There was one time when Master got the lake shrine, there were ducks eating the fish. And so Master got a little .22 rifle or something like that and shot it over their heads to frighten them. And James looked at Master like this. And so one day, not long afterwards, he saw this gun there and picked it up and killed a duck. Well, of course, being James, the story didn't end there. There was a woman, a tenant, who hadn't moved out yet, who was living in the windmill there, and she saw this, phoned the police, reported him. This big commotion all came. James had this tendency. When he first arrived at Encinitas, this isn't a very nice story, but he came at night and he didn't know where to go, where the bathroom was, so he found this sort of a ledge there, outbacks, and so he relieved himself. And the next morning, Mr. Brockway, who was a very dignified disciple and architect, quite old, went out and took his sunbath and lay right in that. And Master used to say that, of James that he's like a mouthful of hot molasses, too hot to swallow, too sticky to spit out. But he said that he said he'll find liberation in this life. He said, I don't know how. But he said, Divine Mother says so, it must be so.
Did he do any ministerial work at all?
He didn't. He finally got to the point where a Master decided he'd better not come around anymore. But you know, that doesn't matter. It's where we are in our heart that matters. It's not where we are in the organization. Your position in an organization doesn't make you more spiritual. Your spirituality is determined entirely by your purity of heart and how much you love God. And we always tend to think in a religious organization, oh, the Pope must be the most spiritual, or the Cardinal must be more spiritual, or in SRF, all the different ministers have to be more spiritual. It may be, it may not be. You can't tell. Some little gardener there may be far more. Just,
Brother Lawrence.
Brother Lawrence is a perfect example, exactly. And so James Collar, who didn't do anything for the work as far as I know, he had a very pure life inwardly, and that's what counts. He wrote to me after The Path came out. He'd read it and appreciated reading about it. But I would have loved to see him again. He was a wonderful person. Had a great sense of humor, but was always getting into problems. Some people just attract them, like that Al Cap character, Joe Bafulsk or whatever he was called, had this black cloud over his head. Yeah, one time he picked up this hitchhiker. Master told us not to pick up hitchhikers. Anyway, he was riding along, and this hitchhiker was sitting in back, and I guess, was he alone? Yeah, because there was somebody sitting beside him. And he suddenly heard Master's voice saying, he's got a knife. And he turned around, this guy was crazy, and he had this knife. He was just about to kill this person sitting next to him, and he said, put that down. And he stopped the car, he said, get out. But Master saved the day, but James attracted the situation. Well, we could go on that subject a long time with the different ones in the path. Let's see if there are other questions. Yes?
How did you develop the different forms of devotional expression you use as a community, and what inspiration from your background did you use?
How did we develop the different forms? Gee, I don't know. They sort of evolved. Of course, we're based on what Master did, but when I first came back from India, I really was into the Indian bhav, but I realized that I had to give that up if I was going to reach Americans, so I used Master's chants. But a lot of Master's chants are more a personal kind of chant than a group kind of chant. For one thing, they don't have rhythm, many of them. So I wrote other chants that could be done more in the group, and we combined those two. Different things as they came along. For example, I was in Sorrento in Italy, met a group there that was charismatic Catholics, and they sang songs with great devotion. They were beautiful songs with guitars, and I realized, well, you know, in India when they chant they have drums, but without drums group chanting is difficult. You lose the rhythm, and people tend to get slower and slower and slower. And with the guitar you have rhythm, and you also have feeling if the chords are right. And I thought that's a good thing to do. It felt right. So I incorporated that, and some of the people at Ananda didn't like the idea because we did chanting with a harmonium, but we did chanting with a harmonium because that's what was done, but not what had to be done. In fact, in India they don't even, I don't know if it's true now, but years ago it used to be true, they wouldn't even allow the harmonium to be played on Air India, on the radio, because it's not an indigenous instrument. It came from Europe. And so just as Chaitanya, when he came to a town where they made drums, Ramakrishna often told this story, how he said, this is the land, this is the earth from which drums are made, and he went into samadhi because he thought drums, and then drums, kirtan, singing God's name merging into God, and so he made that instant transition to God and went into samadhi, just seeing ground. And but drums are so much a part of the Indian scene. Master, when he was in Calcutta, chanted "O God Beautiful" in Bengali. The words are even more beautiful than in English, and he chanted that, and crowds came. They sang all night long, and people filled the house he was in. They filled the street outside, covered the roofs on the houses across the street. Everybody was dancing in God's name, and that's the kind of chanting that really awakens you. Where I found that people, when they chanted only with the harmonium, tended to get slower and slower and slower until it began to sound like a dirge sometimes. So I felt that guitars would help to pick it up, and it really has helped a lot. We haven't gotten away from the harmoniums, but certain songs go very well with guitar. So I included that in it. And so different things came, but I always did it sort of trying to feel, is this in tune with Master's ray, you might say. For instance, the rhythm of the guitar is very much in tune with it, whereas just playing one finger on the harmonium is not in tune even with the way he chanted. When he chanted, there was a lot of rhythm in it too. He had a way of singing that really lifted the energy up. Some people will sing, "Door of my heart," like that. So we've also, and did that fax come through, by the way, Bob?
It did.
Okay, good.
What do you do?
Tomorrow.
All right.
Yeah. I thought about our Sunday services, and I realized that we can't talk about the same thing every Sunday and get people to keep coming back. We have to explore different aspects of our teachings. In fact, I've tried to do that with the books I've written too, not just take the central message, but see how that applies. This is the role of the disciple, to bring the guru out into the world, to explain what he meant in new settings. For example, if he had been a banker and used only banker terminology, and I was lecturing to a group of fishermen up in Alaska who had never been inside a bank, what would a ledger book do as an illustration? I'd have to bring in something that they could be familiar with that would mean something in their lives. So we have to take the original teaching and then explain it in a way that will relate to the people that we're talking with. So his teachings are wonderfully practical on many, many different levels. Every time I study his teachings, I'm just amazed at what a vast variety of levels of life his teachings apply to. That if you use them creatively, you can use that same teaching to help people to become better businessmen, better wives, husbands, friends, teachers, whatever it might be. And he himself explored that by starting schools, by writing a book on the art of success, scientific healing affirmations for healing, the law of success is the name of that other book, and so on. He showed that way. So I've tried to take that, and in SRF2 they all take a subject on relationships or how to win friends or different subjects. Well, that's all very well. Through the year you give a teaching, it's fairly complete, but somebody comes to Sunday service and hears a talk on relationships. Somebody else asks him, what do they teach? Oh, they teach relationships. They're into relationships, and that isn't at all what we're into, except as an addition or an expression, a manifestation of the central teaching, but it doesn't define the central teaching at all. So it occurred to me that a very good thing would be to have some kind of a ceremony, not just an announcement, self-realization teachings are A, B, C, D, but have a ceremony in which people can enter, that they take part in, that says the basic teaching every Sunday, but in a poetic way that you can hear Sunday after Sunday and still feel inspiration. And so I wrote this Festival of Light. It came to me, interestingly enough, in Assisi, and where St. Francis lived. But it was strange too. I was going through a very hard time personally in my own life at that time. But as soon as I sat down to work on this, that didn't exist, just this existed, and I prayed to Master to show me. And the words were given to me in ways that just, I couldn't quite understand how they came. For instance, there was one part where I suddenly heard the words, a little bird flew out. What's that got to do with this ceremony, for God's sake? But I let the thought continue, and the whole thing just came out the way it is, telling the story of the soul. In allegorical form, the soul is the little bird going flying out into the world, but it's the allegory of the soul. Then I came to a part where suddenly I heard this very jazzy song. And I thought, oh, wait a minute, Master, this is a bit, doesn't sound quite right. Out of the silence came the song of creation, out of the darkness came the night. Out of the darkness, out of the silence, thunders the cosmic sound, amen. Out of the darkness, out of the silence, thunders the cosmic sound, om. And I thought, wait a minute, I've never written any music like this. But it was great. It picked the whole thing up. It was just right for that moment. So I said, okay, Master, and I wrote it down. And that's how this whole thing came. But it gives our central teaching in an inspiring way that every Sunday you can hear it and still have a subject for a sermon that's on another subject, but you always are reminded what we're here for, what this teaching is really all about. The very history of our work, how Jesus, Master told this story, that Jesus appeared to Babaji and said to him, what's happened to my church? They're doing good works, but they've lost touch with the deeper reality of my teaching, communion with God. Let us send someone to the West who can bring people back to that original teaching. And so Sri Yukteswar said to Master, you are the one who was sent to me that Babaji promised me for training to be sent to the West. And so Jesus was the one who actually sent this message to the West. Well, to say that every Sunday helps you to remember why Christ's picture is on that altar. It's not a political convenience because we're living in the West. It's because Christ inspired Babaji to send Master to the West with this message. And again, that constant reminder is something that helps to bring you back to your center. So that was the evolution of that one. Each one, I could go into them in different ways, but they all have this purpose.
I have a question.
Yes.
I hear you say you pray to Master, and then sometimes you pray to the Divine Mother, and then you pray to God and Jesus also, or do you just combine?
You know, it's all God. It's all God. But we have a whole line of masters, and it helps to pray to the different masters for different things. For instance, for wisdom, sometimes I pray to Sri Yukteswar. For miracles, I often pray to Babaji. I find that he can come through sometimes in great ways. It sort of depends on my mood of the moment. But I know that they're all one. There's really no difference. It's more my own focus. Is that enough? Okay.